The Chicago Bears came close to trading for Matthew Judon from the New England Patriots, which means Ryan Poles is definitely looking to add a stud pass rusher to pair with Montez Sweat.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. On the show today, we check in on and catch up on all the details surrounding the Bears' pursuit of Matthew Judon via trade. Ended up going to the Atlanta Falcons, but the Bears were right in it to the very end, and we got some good details on what exactly the Bears were offering and why they didn't end up landing the pass rusher from the Patriots. We'll kind of take a look at what the different implications of the move would have been and whether or not the Bears are better off not going after Matthew Judon and sort of the trade-offs of trading for him, adding to your pass rush versus the things you have to give up and the things you lose when Judon is added into the mix, and also what options might still be available for Ryan Poles if he does want to go out and add that pass rusher opposite Montez Sweat. We'll wrap up by looking ahead to Bears-Bengals on Saturday, where we are actually going to see the Chicago Bears starters after all. Matt Eberflus surprising us a little bit with that announcement, so we'll take a look at what we should expect, which, spoiler alert, I don't think we should expect very much going up against the Cincinnati Bengals backups on Saturday. But the big news to end the week was Matthew Judon being traded from the New England Patriots to the Atlanta Falcons, and normally that might not super cross our radar, except reports right away were that the trade came down to either the Falcons or your Chicago Bears, and that ultimately ended up going to the Atlanta Falcons for a third-round draft pick. And I think when the trade news initially came out, there was this feeling of like, yeah, okay, it would make sense that Ryan Poles might not want to give up a third-round pick to get a 32-year-old pass rusher who's coming off of a season-ending bicep injury. That, yeah, maybe that would seem like more than Ryan Poles would want to give up for him. That's not the case, because reports came out pretty quickly from NBC Sports Boston and others that the Chicago Bears also offered the New England Patriots a third-round pick. So the Falcons and Bears were both offering third-round picks to the Patriots for Matthew Judon's services. And so then it's a question of like, okay, well, first of all, which third-round pick do you expect to be more valuable? You know, so essentially, which team do you think is going to win fewer games and therefore have that third-round pick be a higher pick in the draft and be more valuable in that regard? I'm not necessarily here to do a podcast debating the merits of the Falcons and the Chicago Bears here, but I think they're not super far apart in theory. I mean, I think adding Judon certainly makes whatever team gets him better than the other team because you're adding a guy who's had 15 sacks 2 years ago and 12 and a half sacks the year before that. So it's a little bit like, I don't know that it makes a big difference on whose draft pick was better. So we were still, again, kind of left wondering, well, why did the Patriots take the Falcons offer? And as it turns out, apparently it was more on Matthew Judon deciding that he would rather go to the Falcons in those negotiations than the Chicago Bears. Not because of the team he was going to, but for obvious reasons, the money. Evidently, Ryan Poles was in some kind of negotiations with Judon and his agent and the Patriots throughout this process, negotiating what a contract would look like. Because if we bigger picture here, that's why Matthew Judon wanted to be traded from the Patriots. He was due like $6.5 million this year. He had 15.5 sacks 2 years ago, was injured last season, but has still been a double-digit sack guy his last 2 healthy seasons, and says, hey, I'm getting towards the end of my career. I need one more big payday. Pay me or trade me. And the Patriots said, all right, we'll trade you. And so Ryan Poles was engaged in those trade talks, engaged in those contract negotiations. And according to a weird enough source here, Former Kansas City Chiefs general manager Scott Pioli was on NFL Network and said, and I quote, "What it came down to was the money and what was going to be done with the contract. He went to Atlanta based on the money and that situation and what the contract was going to be." Pioli said, as part of that clip, that he was visiting the Bears training camp the last couple of days. So he was in the room with Ryan Poles, evidently, he says, as he's having these phone calls and negotiating with the other team. So I don't know exactly, I don't feel like Pioli necessarily had permission to just go put that out in the public, but regardless, he said it on NFL Network, and we all get to know it now. Came down to the money, and he went to Atlanta based on the money and what the contract was going to be. Now, what's interesting about that is, as I'm recording this Thursday night to be the Friday morning's podcast, Matthew Judon still does not have a contract from the Atlanta Falcons. Like, the trade has been, as far as I'm aware, made official at this point. I guess I don't know if he's passed a physical, but like, it has been formally agreed to, yet the contract has not. But Judon chose the Falcons for the money that he hasn't gotten yet. So that's what's interesting. But I mean, you look back to the Bears with Montez Sweat. They traded for Sweat with the idea that they would pay him, and probably had some conversations with Sweat before the deal about what kind of money he was looking for. And then they did indeed eventually get the deal done. But fresh off of the Hassan Reddick trade news, where he's now requesting a trade away from the Jets because he was traded to the Jets and the Jets haven't paid him yet, despite that was the whole reason he wanted to be traded in the first place. I'm still left a little bit unanswered on, okay, like, is a Judon contract just still coming? And they don't have pen to paper, so it hasn't been reported yet, but more or less a Judon contract is agreed to. They just need to complete a physical, complete the trade, and maybe this weekend we'll hear of Matthew Judon's new, 3-year, $60 million contract, or whatever the number ends up being there. Like, that to me is like the one last missing domino. But I do think good on Ryan Poles for engaging in every option to upgrade his pass rush with someone who's legit. He's a legit pass rusher. Would be a huge upgrade for the Bears if they had Matthew Judon. But someone who's 32 and coming off an injury, good for Ryan Poles of taking the approach we've seen him take in free agency, where he sets a number and has a certain value in his mind of what he's willing to pay a player. And if that number is exceeded, he's out. And he's not willing to, jeopardize, that's the word I was looking for, jeopardize his financial future for any particular player right now, especially if, Judon's very good, but he's not, I don't know if he's in the elite category. He's a Pro Bowl player, but he's not, I don't know that he's the Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack in their prime level elite guy. He's very good, but is he like top, if you're trying to name your top 5 pass rushers in the NFL, I don't think he's on that list. Maybe he cracks your top 10. Maybe not. I mean, it depends on how you start to go there. So, this is not like a player that you had to do whatever it takes to possibly get him. Would have been nice to have him, but Ryan Poles sticks to his numbers, sticks to his plan, and says, all right, we would love to have Judon at a good value, but we're not just going to overspend because we're so desperate for a pass rusher. We're going to look at other options and maybe just stick with the guys still on the team. So we'll look at what some of the other options might be for the Chicago Bears and why maybe sticking with the guys he has isn't so bad of a strategy after all. Next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by Gametime, the best way to get tickets for all of your favorite live events. I have the Gametime app on my phone, and I use it all the time. I went to see Blink-182 a couple of weeks ago in concert, got my tickets on Gametime, because with Gametime, I can see my view from the seat I'm purchasing in the app. So I know exactly what I'm getting for my purchase, and I also know exactly how much I'm going to pay, because Gametime has all-in pricing, so there aren't any added fees tacked on to your ticket price at the end of the checkout process that makes them cost way more than you thought you would when you first started selecting those tickets. It's not only for concerts, it's for Bears games, it's for comedy shows, theater events, any kind of live entertainment in your area. If there's a resale market, you can get a great deal on tickets with Gametime. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that code LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So the Bears tried but did not land Matthew Judon. Certainly understand some disappointment there. Adding a 10-sack guy, a double-digit sack guy opposite Montez Sweat would have been a huge boost to the Chicago Bears defense. There's no denying he's an upgrade. The debate is whether it's worth giving up a third-round pick and handing a multi-year, well-paid contract to a 32-year-old pass rusher coming off of a torn bicep injury. And now, realistically, the torn bicep injury probably gets made out to be more than it is. Like, this is not an injury that you feel like is going to linger and make him a worse player. Like, it's one thing if it's an Achilles or a knee or something where you wonder if he's going to lose some explosiveness there. But, like, I'm not sure that the force Matthew Judon can generate with his bicep is going to make or break his ability as a pass rusher. Like, not to say it's not serious, but, like, this isn't one of those, like, oh, it was all downhill after he tore his bicep. I don't think it's quite that big of a deal. It's just more like he's just turned 32. Actually, yesterday was literally his birthday. And you wonder if it's more about, is that a sign of the durability just as you age is going to go down? Not what the injury was specifically, but just that he just had a season-ending injury, and, like, is that going to be the beginning of more injuries for him? I don't think that's as strong of an argument as, like, more about, do you give up a third-round pick for a 32-year-old player that might be good for how many more years? Is Matthew Judon going to be a 10-sack guy? Probably this year, maybe next year, and anything beyond that, we're talking age 34, 35 season. Can you expect him to be a 10-sack guy? I mean, maybe, but I don't know that I'm counting on it. And so are you giving up a fairly premium draft pick, a top 100 draft pick, for maybe ideally 2 years of a really good pass rusher opposite Montez Sweat, and also giving up a significant amount of your salary cap space to do so? Like, the Bears have cap space, but, are you putting another $16, $18, $20 million into the edge rusher position that you already have $20+ million in for Montez Sweat? Or would you be better off spreading that money somewhere else? Whether that's investing another big contract in the offensive line to give Caleb Williams better protection there, or maybe a defensive tackle at some point instead of another edge rusher. I mean, eventually, Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards are going to need new contracts. Those numbers are going to go up. Kyler Gordon and Jaquan Brisker are only a couple years away from their contracts being up and needing big extensions. Like, if you start to tie up money in a 32, then 33, then 34-year-old Matthew Judon, you might have less money for the 25, 26, and 27-year-old Kyler Gordon and Jaquan Brisker. Plus, that third-round pick can become something pretty good, right? This is not a fifth-round pick for Ryan Bates, where, okay, a lot of fifth-round picks don't become very much. And it's a little bit tough when you gave up a fourth for Keenan Allen, and you're giving up a third for Judon, who's, I guess, about the same age, but, like, are they the same caliber of player? And a second for Montez Sweat. I mean, is Judon 1 round less valuable than Montez Sweat? I mean, the thing is, Montez Sweat's 27, and you give him a long-term contract expecting he'll be here for 4 or 5 seasons at a minimum, if not more than that. Like, that's a big part of why you go after someone like Montez Sweat, and where Judon's much more of a short-term rental, not a 1-year rental, but a short-term rental. And the Chicago Bears right now are in the long-term team-building process. So that's where I think Ryan Poles said, listen, I'd be willing to part with a third-round pick to give me a better pass rusher, but because that might limit my draft next year and whatever that player becomes, but it's not going to limit my draft for 2 or 3 years. But that too big of a salary number on a guaranteed money on his contract can limit your ability to build the rest of the team for 2 or 3 years, or however long the duration of that contract goes. So I think that's where Ryan Poles said, I'm drawing a line financially before I'm drawing the line on the draft picks, because a third-round pick for 12.5 sacks or 15 sacks or whatever you get from him sounds about worth it. But you got to have the financial side of that too, and make sure that that deal is done so you don't run into a Hassan Riddick situation. And it sounds like that's where things got mixed up, according to Scott Pioli there. It doesn't mean Ryan Poles is done looking at pass rushers, though. I mean, if he was willing to give up a third-round pick for Matthew Judon, he's willing to invest something significant in finding another pass rusher. He's looking for opportunities to upgrade that position. Unique Ngakoue remains a free agent option still out there. At this point, like, I don't know why they wouldn't have signed him yet if they could have signed him anytime in the last 2 weeks. At this point, like, it's not too late to sign him. It just would be surprising if they chose to sign him now when they haven't had any lesser reason to in any recent weeks. But it does make you wonder if he's calling around at any other trades. Hassan Reddick, I don't think is a real option for the Chicago Bears. I don't think that's on the table. I wouldn't get your hopes up about Hassan Reddick. I don't think the Jets are going to trade him, and I don't think Ryan Poles would want to trade for Reddick and pay Reddick the kind of contract that he is looking for, because clearly that's the big problem with him with the Jets, and it doesn't feel like that's going to fit what the Bears want right now. But Hassan Reddick is not the only option that the Bears might have on the trade market, and it's worth noting, like, Reddick is the one who has requested a trade, and there aren't really any other guys who are clearly holding out and demanding to be traded. But there are a number of guys that could be on the radar here, especially as we get closer to the trade deadline. Because if you think back to last season with Montez Sweat, the Washington Commanders weren't like in a hurry to trade Montez Sweat necessarily. It wasn't like he demanded a trade and was holding out and causing all these locker room headaches the way Hassan Reddick kind of is right now. But the Commanders looked and said, listen, this guy's going to be a free agent this offseason, and we know we can't pay him. We paid Jonathan Allen, but they decided we're not going to be able to pay Montez Sweat what he wants. So let's trade him now at the deadline to get something for him, as opposed to letting him walk in free agency and getting nothing but maybe a compensatory draft pick if you don't sign anybody else. And I wonder if there won't be teams in a similar situation at this year's trade deadline. Not that they want to get rid of a guy, but they recognize that their player is entering free agency and that they're not going to be able to re-sign him. So if you look ahead, like, it's a really nice crop of upcoming edge rusher free agents. Some of these players will still re-sign with their teams and not hit the free agent market, and very few, if any of them, will actually be traded at the deadline, but they're all names to keep an eye on here, whether it's a trade deadline name or a name that's going to hit free agency next season. So for example, I'll run through like a quick list of guys. Chase Young, the New Orleans Saints, set to be a free agent this year. Josh Uche from the New England Patriots. Derek Barnett from the Texans. Josh Sweat from the Eagles. Charles Omenihu from Kansas City. And Marcus Davenport from Detroit. All guys under 30, quality pass rushers set to hit free agency this offseason. It seems likely that maybe one of them could get traded at the deadline. I mean, you know what I mean? If 6 guys are all set to hit free agency, plus I think it's probably more likely that the older guys get traded. Khalil Mack could be traded at the deadline. Joey Bosa could be traded at the deadline. But these guys are all 32 plus in the Matthew Judon category, where, again, you're giving up draft picks and paying a lot of money for an older pass rusher who's only going to be there for a couple seasons. I'm not sure, but any of these younger guys are the ones that you feel like you could feel more comfortable giving up a third or maybe fourth round pick if they're a slightly lesser pass rusher. You know, giving up a mid-round pick and giving a mid-sized contract to Josh Sweat from the Eagles. Why not have 2 Sweats on this Bears defensive line? Or Derek, I mean, any of these guys that you feel like they could be a real pass rusher that maybe is a little bit of better value and a bit younger and a longer-term addition, even if they haven't quite had the back-to-back 12.5 and 15.5 sack seasons that Matthew Judon had. It just fits more with the Bears' team-building timeline. And you got to think, I mean, hopefully like one of these guys hits free agency also, and maybe one of these guys gets traded. There's a bunch of edge rushers set to hit the last year of their contract. They're not all going to get re-signed. So I think Ryan Poles is looking long-term here and saying, it's not Matthew Judon or bust. I'm going to have options to ultimately add a pass rusher with Montez Sweat. Just might not be in time for week 1. And in the meantime, it's a lot more playing time for Austin Booker, for Dominique Robinson, for Jacob Martin, Daniel Hardy, DeMarcus Walker, whoever makes this roster with around Montez Sweat. Like, the more they play, the faster they will develop. And if they had Matthew Judon ahead of them, certainly your pass rush would be better. But those guys would develop a little bit faster. So maybe Ryan Poles says, listen, like, am I better off having a noticeably worse pass rush with the idea that these guys are all getting better, and so that they will all be better pass rushers next season than they would if they were losing snaps to Matthew Judon? I mean, is he ready to go all in on a vet in that same way? I think overall, yes, they would be better with Matthew Judon if the money worked out. But like, I think there's a silver lining here for player development and saying, yeah, let's get our young guys some playing time here and not handicap ourselves by losing a draft pick and being locked in on a contract for a couple seasons. At least a 1-year deal for someone like Yannick Ngakoue is no draft pick and no long-term financial repercussions there. The Bears have cap space now. They could still make that signing and not affect their long-term flexibility quite as much in that regard. In the meantime, their attention turns to the Cincinnati Bengals on Saturday. After their joint practice on Thursday, Matt Eberflus says the Bears starters will play. So we'll look at what we'll be watching for in this game, even though they won't be facing any Cincinnati Bengals starters. That's next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to be sure that you have access to quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, because LinkedIn Jobs has the tools for you to find the right candidates for your team faster and for free. I'm on LinkedIn, and I bet you're on LinkedIn. And if you're not on LinkedIn, that's okay. A lot of your friends, family members, and coworkers are all part of LinkedIn. And that's why it's not just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In any given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All the talk about Matthew Judon certainly overshadowed the Bears' third preseason game, and we now know officially Caleb Williams will make his Soldier Field debut on Saturday. I can't help but wonder if that's maybe a small part of the reason why Ryan Poles wants him to play. You know, with no Family Fest this season, no practices at Soldier Field, in that way, this will be his only time to be in the home locker room, home stadium, go through the whole game day process at home before the regular season. I don't think that's the deciding factor. I don't think that's the primary reason, but I think there is a little bit of value there. I think more generally, Matt Eberflus wants him to go through the process of warm-ups, getting play calls in, just doing the basic stuff that you're going to have to do play in and play out, day in and day out in the regular season in the NFL to get more experience. I think it's valuable for him, even going up against Cincinnati Bengals. Backups. Because again, it's not so much important to me what the Bears offense produces on the field, just like in the Bills game, right? Okay, if you get field goals versus touchdown, who cares? Like, it's about Caleb Williams operating things smoothly, nailing the fundamentals, getting the plays, the protections, the calls all in. You know, it's the footwork, it's the mechanics, it's making smart decisions with the football. And whether it's starters or backups as your opponent, I don't care. Do all those things either way. Ideally, knowing that it's Bengals backups, you'd like to see the first team offense dominate them a little bit. I wonder if Ryan Poles might give a few of the veterans more of a day off. Like, okay, yeah, you're going to play Caleb Williams in the starting offensive line, but like, I don't think Keenan Allen needs to be out there against Bengals backups. I mean, they played him in the first preseason game, so maybe, but like, I'd still have most of the starting lineup out there, but like, your 32-year-old wide receiver doesn't need to be out there. You know, your 31-year-old free safety, Kevin Byard, I don't know that he needs to be out there, but you know, it depends on how the injury situations look for other guys out there too. So as for me, for the starters, like, I'm expecting 1 or 2 drives at most, not the whole first quarter, but just like Caleb will attempt a couple passes. He'll finish, 3 for 4 for 45 yards and no touchdowns, no interceptions, and that's his day. Attempts a couple passes, hands off a few passes, get him out of there, onto the backups, where I really want to see Velus Jones take another step at running back and not muff kickoffs. I want to see Ian Wheeler keep flashing as an undrafted rookie running back in the backfield, see where Travis Homer fits into that conversation, but I want to see how the running back battle works out. I want to see Tyler Scott bounce back from the Bills game where he had a fumble and kind of fell a little bit out of favor working with the second team behind Simba Webster and DeAndre Carter, but I want to see this wide receiver 4 battle there. After Allen, Moore, and Odunze, who's next? We've been assuming it's Tyler Scott, but like, he bumped down. Like, are we going to see more DeAndre Carter and Simba Webster ahead of him? Where's that competition? Is Colin Johnson going to be healthy and able to play and maybe keep making a name for himself in this wide receiver battle? Can he have a couple more touchdowns from either Tyson Bagent or Brett Rippon again? I mean, or is Dante Pettis still in this mix? And how do all these guys fit on special teams? Who's going to get the kickoff and punt returns? Is Velus Jones going to wave away Tyler Scott and muff another one? Like, is Carter going to get more opportunities back there? Can we get a sense of who's really winning in those spots? That's, again, what I want to see against the Bengals, even if it's going to be a lot of backups. Same thing for the defensive line. hey guys, Ryan Poles just tried to trade for Matthew Judon. He's telling you, we need to be better at that position. Show him that they don't need Matthew Judon. If you're going up against Cincinnati Bengals backups, whether you're a starter or not, dominate their backups. I want to see Austin Booker continue to look like, hey, I am better than all these backups you have against me. I want to see one of these other defensive linemen stand out more, especially one of the defensive tackles. I want to see Gervon Dexter dominate some backups. Let's see it. He had a good joint practice against the Bengals by all accounts. Let's see it on the field. Let's see technique, progress, development, growth from those guys. Dominate. Show Ryan Poles that you don't need to trade for a Matthew Judon. You've got guys you like here anywhere, and that their development is going to be worth it. Certainly, dominating some backups doesn't mean, wow, okay, they're going to be great in the regular season, but like, if you don't dominate the backups, we got a problem. So at least check the box of, yep, the Bears' rotational pass rushers should be better than the Bengals' backup offensive line. Then, of course, there's also the Bears' backup cornerback battle. We've talked about a little bit earlier in the week on the podcast about Greg Stroman versus Jalen Jones versus Josh Blackwell, playing outside, playing in the slot, playing a lot of special teams. Adrian Colbert at safety, special teams battling to make this 53-man roster. How they do on the kickoff coverage teams, the punt return teams, the punt coverage teams, etc., is really going to go a long way in this final preseason game. So there is still a lot to watch for in this game, no matter how long the Chicago Bears starters actually play. You can be sure we'll break down everything we see from Caleb Williams and all the other standout players and performances from this third Chicago Bears preseason game. Make sure then that you come on back on Monday for all of our analysis from the preseason game. You got to subscribe then on YouTube or wherever you listen to the podcast, so that way you're making sure to keep up with all of our daily in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're looking for your second listen, go check out the Locked On NFL podcast. I was a guest host today with David Harrison. We talked about the Matthew Judon trade and what that means for the Atlanta Falcons. They also signed the safety Justin Simmons, formerly of the Denver Broncos. So we looked at where the Falcons then fit in the NFC South and the playoff race there. And then we turned our attention to all the different injuries around various training camps and some of the big missing players right now and how that's going to affect their team's upcoming regular season. So for more football talk, go check out Locked On NFL. Then come on back to Locked On Bears on Monday and be your first listen once again. And then once again, you'll also get another opportunity to bear down.